The wedding hall of the imperial palace was brighter than 1,000 suns. Crystal lights floated in the air. Golden banners of the empire hung from the high silver walls. Noble families, war commanders, royal advisors, and foreign rulers filled the great chamber. Everyone had come to see the most important marriage in the galaxy. But no one in that hall looked happy. They were not there to celebrate love. They were there to witness what many believed was a terrible mistake. At the center of the hall stood the Alien Empress, ruler of the largest empire in known space. She was tall, calm, and radiant in her royal white armor and long flowing cloak. Her face showed strength, wisdom, and perfect control. Beside her stood the man she had chosen as her husband, a human. He did not wear royal armor. He did not carry a weapon. He had no crown, no famous family name, and no sign of great power. He wore a simple dark suit with silver lines across the chest. His posture was relaxed. His face was calm. His eyes were quiet and unreadable to the nobles of the empire. He looked painfully ordinary. Whispers moved through the hall like poison. A human? This is an insult to the throne. He looks weak. The empress could have married a war prince, a star-lord, even a god-blood noble. But she chose him. Some nobles laughed behind their hands. Some stared with open anger. The military commanders looked at the human as if he were a stain on the honor of the empire. Even the visiting rulers from other worlds struggled to hide their surprise. The human heard the whispers. He heard every insult, but he did not react. He simply stood beside the empress with a calm face, as if the hatred around him meant nothing at all. That made the nobles hate him even more. The High Chancellor stepped forward to begin the final vow. His voice was strong, but even he sounded uneasy. By the ancient laws of crown, blood, and star, he said, we gather to witness the union of Her Imperial Majesty and the chosen consort she has named before all worlds. A low murmur spread through the crowd at the words chosen consort. It reminded everyone that this was not a political marriage forced by war or peace. The Empress had chosen this human by her own will. That truth burned many hearts in the room. The Empress turned toward the human and lifted a shining ring made from living crystal, the sacred bond ring of the imperial line. It was a symbol older than many civilizations. Every ruler of the empire had worn one. For a brief moment, the entire hall fell silent. Even those who hated the marriage could feel the weight of that moment. The Empress placed the bond ring into the human's hand. Before my people, she said, her voice clear and steady. Before the stars, before the throne, I name you my husband. The words hit the hall like a shockwave. Several nobles lowered their heads in anger. One old lord nearly crushed his glass in his hand. A military general looked away as if he could not bear to watch. The human looked at the Empress. His expression softened just a little. Then he answered in a quiet voice, and before all who watch, I stand with you. It was a simple answer. Too simple, some thought. Not grand, not royal. Not worthy of the moment. But the Empress did not seem disappointed. She looked at him as if his words were enough. The ceremony should have ended in glory. Music should have filled the hall. The crowd should have cheered. Blessings should have been spoken across the empire. Instead, the silence remained cold. Then a royal noblewoman stepped slightly forward and spoke just loud enough for others to hear. He speaks like a servant. Another noble replied, a servant would at least know his place. A few people around them smiled. Still, the human did not react. That was what unsettled some of them. He was not ashamed. He was not nervous. He did not try to impress anyone. It was as if he had no need to prove himself. As if the judgment of emperors and nobles had no power over him. The Empress noticed this, as she always did. She had watched him closely since the day they first met. He was gentle. He was respectful. He spoke little. But there was something else about him, something hidden deep behind his calm eyes. He was never afraid. Not when royal guards searched him. Not when warlords tested his words. Not when proud nobles insulted him to his face. He remained still, quiet, and strangely untouched by pressure, as if he had lived through far greater things than this. The High Chancellor raised his staff, ready to announce the final blessing of the union. But before he could speak, the great doors of the hall opened. An old priest entered. He was one of the oldest servants of the temple, so old that many believed he should no longer walk without help. His long robes dragged behind him. His hands trembled. His pale eyes looked weak with age. At first, no one paid him much attention. Then the old priest looked up. His gaze fell on the human husband, and everything changed. The priest stopped walking. His face lost all color. The silver cup in his hand slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. The sharp sound echoed across the silent hall. Every eye turned toward him. The old priest began to shake. His lips moved. But no words came out at first. Then, with horror in his eyes, he took one slow step back. The hall watched in confusion. Then, to the shock of everyone present, the old priest fell to his knees. Not before the throne, not before the empress, before the human. A wave of fear passed through the chamber. The human did not move. The empress stared at the priest, her calm finally breaking for the first time. And in a weak, trembling voice, the old priest whispered, "It cannot be. He has returned." The wedding feast should have brought music, laughter, and proud speeches. Instead, the palace was full of whispers. News of the old priest's strange reaction spread faster than light through the capital. By nightfall, every noble house in the empire was talking about the same thing. Why had the priest fallen to his knees before a human? Why had fear filled his face? And what did he mean by those final words? But in public, no one dared ask too much. The court chose a safer path. They mocked him inside the moon chamber, where the highest nobles gathered after the wedding. Anger filled the air like smoke. Crystal tables stood under blue light from the glass ceiling. Above them, stars moved slowly across the night sky. The richest and proudest bloodlines in the empire sat in a circle, speaking in cold voices. "This cannot continue," said Lord Vaylor, one of the oldest nobles of the inner court. His sharp face looked harder than stone. "The empress has embarrassed the throne enough. If we let this human stand beside her without challenge, then we accept him." "We do not accept him," said Lady Cerise, her jeweled claws tapping the arm of her chair. "He is a mistake." "He may be worse than a mistake," another noble said quietly. The priest saw something. Lair gave a dry laugh. "Old men see ghosts everywhere. Fear is a sickness of age." "No, the truth is simpler. The human is ordinary. The empress has allowed emotion to cloud her judgment." A military commander standing nearby crossed his arms. "Then prove it." Room became silent. That was what they all wanted. Not war. Not open insult. Something cleaner. Something public. Something that would break the human in front of the court and force the empress to see the truth. Lord Vaylor leaned forward. "Tomorrow night," he said, "the new consort will attend his first royal gathering as husband of the empress. Let him be tested there." Lady Cerise smiled. "A proper test. A noble test," Vaylor added. "Words, customs, tradition, judgment. If he is as weak as he looks, he will fail before everyone." "And if he does not?" asked the commander. Vaylor's smile faded. "He will." The next evening, the Hall of Tides shone with silver light. The Empress entered first, wearing dark royal armor with a crown of living crystal above her brow. Beside her walked her human husband, calm as always, dressed in simple, formal black. He looked plain among warriors, nobles, and royal bloodlines. Wrapped in golden gems, the hall was full. Too full. The Empress noticed it at once. This was not just a gathering. It was a stage. She glanced once at her husband. "I am planning something." He looked ahead, his hands behind his back. Yes, his answer was so calm that she turned to him for a moment. "And you do not care?" He gave a small smile. "Should I?" Before she could answer, the herald struck the floor with his staff. "By order of the imperial court," he announced, "the royal houses welcome the chosen husband of her imperial majesty. By ancient custom, all new consorts must answer before the noble circle and prove they understand the weight of the throne." A few nobles nodded with fake politeness. Others watched with hunger in their eyes. The Empress's voice grew colder. "That custom has not been used in 300 years. Lord Vaylor stepped forward and bowed. "Ancient customs still matter, Your Majesty. Surely your husband would not fear a simple test of honor." The hall waited. Everyone expected the human to hesitate. He did not. He stepped forward one pace and said, "I do not fear it." That answer pleased the court. A trap only worked if the prey stepped into it. The questions began. A noble scholar asked him about law, hoping to confuse him with old imperial language. The human answered simply and clearly. Then a trade minister asked him about distant systems, expecting ignorance. He answered again, calm and correct. A priest questioned him on royal tradition. He answered with respect, but somehow made the priest sound foolish without saying anything rude. Slowly, the mood in the hall began to change. The nobles had expected a weak man. Instead, they found someone impossible to shake. Lady Cirrus tried next. She rose from her seat, eyes bright with cruelty. "If you stand beside the Empress, she yes." The silence in the Hall of Tides was heavy and cold. General Kael'tar did not speak again. He simply bowed once, a sharp, stiff movement, and walked back to his place among the other commanders. He did not look at the human again. He did not look at anyone. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. The nobles watched him, confused. They had expected a show of force, a moment of humiliation. Instead, they saw fear in a warrior who had never known fear. Lord Vaylor's plan had broken. The air in the hall felt dangerous now. No one else stepped forward to test the human. The questions stopped. The smiles disappeared. The Empress saw it all. She saw the shock in her court. She saw the unreadable calm on her husband's face. And she saw the terror in General Kael's eyes. Something was wrong. Very wrong. That night, after the gathering ended, she did not return to her chambers. Instead, she ordered her silent wing shuttle and flew alone to the oldest place in the capital. The Temple of Echoes. It stood on a mountain of black stone, far from the palace lights. No machines worked near it. No modern ships were allowed to land. This was a place of old power, older than the empire itself. The priests here did not serve the throne. They served the memories of the galaxy. The high priest was waiting for her. He was so old his skin looked like cracked paper, and his eyes were milky white. He could not see, but it was said he saw everything that mattered. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice like dry leaves. "You come with a question about shadows." "I come about my husband," she said, her voice echoing in the empty stone hall. The old priest nodded slowly. "The quiet one. You know of him?" "Stars know of him," the priest replied. He turned and began to walk deeper into the temple, his bare feet whispering against the cold floor. The Empress followed. They entered a chamber with walls made of crystal that showed not their reflections, but scenes from ancient times, wars between star gods, civilizations rising and falling, secrets written in light, long before your empire. The priest began, before the first ships sailed the void. There were beings who walked between stars. Not gods as we call them now, something else. They built and destroyed. They gave laws to suns and names to black holes. He stopped before a large crystal that showed a figure standing alone in a field of dead stars. The figure had no clear face, no crown, no army. Only a shadow that stretched across galaxies. Among them was one who did not seek worship. He did not build empires. He watched. He remembered. When the Great War came, the war that broke time itself, he did not fight for one side. He fought to end it. And when it was over, he vanished. The Empress stared at the crystal. Who was he? He had many names, the priest said. The Silent King, the Last Witness, the One who Waits. He turned his blind eyes toward her. But in the oldest prophecies, he has one title that never changed. The Human. The word hit her like ice. Human. She repeated. Not as you understand it, the priest said. Not a species from a small blue world, but a form. A choice. A mask worn by something too powerful to be seen as it truly is. The Empress felt her heart beat faster. Why would such a being come here? Why marry me? The prophecies say he will return not with an army, but alone. Not with a crown, but in simple clothes. The proud will laugh at him. The wise will not see him. And those who mock him. The priest's voice dropped to a whisper. Will kneel to him before the end. She remembered the old priest at her wedding falling to his knees. She remembered General Kale stepping back in terror. How do I know if this is true? She asked, her voice barely audible. The old priest was silent for a long time. Then he said, ask him a question only he can answer. What question? Ask him. The priest's milky eyes seemed to look through her, into a place far away. If he remembers the song of the first sun, with those words, the crystal behind him darkened. The images faded. The chamber grew cold. The Empress left the temple with more questions than answers. Her mind was full of shadows and prophecies. The Silent King, the Human. Was it possible? Was the gentle man beside her really something ancient and terrible, wearing a human face? When she returned to the palace, it was late. The halls were empty and quiet. She went to the royal gardens, a place of night-blooming flowers and soft silver. Light. He was there. Her husband stood on a high balcony, looking up at the stars. He was not wearing his formal clothes anymore, just simple dark pants and a shirt. He looked peaceful, ordinary, but she saw him differently now. She walked to his side. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just watched the stars together. Then, gathering all her courage, she asked the question the old priest had given her. Her voice was soft but clear in the quiet night. Do you remember, she said, the song of the first sun? He did not move. He did not look at her, but the air around them changed. It grew still, too still. The night flowers seemed to stop breathing. The silver lights dimmed slowly. He turned his head. His eyes were no longer calm. They were deep, old, and full of memories that did not belong to a man. Yes, he said, his voice different now. Not gentle, not quiet. Just true. I remember it. I was there when it was sung. And in that moment, the Empress knew. The priest was right. Her husband was not what he seemed, and the galaxy was not ready for what was coming. The Empress did not sleep that night. She stood on the balcony long. After he had gone inside, the words, I was there when it was sung, echoing in her mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. The stars above seemed different. Now not just lights in the sky, but witnesses. Had they watched him too? Across the unthinkable stretch of time, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She had married a mystery, a quiet, gentle man who carried the weight of dead suns in his memory. The court, of course, knew nothing. By morning, the whispers had a new flavor. General Krill had claimed illness and was absent from the War Council. Lord Vaylor and his circle spoke of the humans' clever tricks and low-born cunning. They decided a different approach was needed. Not subtle tests, but overwhelming force. They would remind the Empress of her duty through a display of true power, the kind only an empire could wield. Their opportunity came sooner than anyone expected. It began as a tremor in the deep space sensor nets. Then a scream of torn metal and dying engines across the emergency channels. The Krill Empire had attacked. A war fleet of 100 jagged black ships, known as the Shadowfangs, emerged from a rift at the edge of the star system. They did not send threats. They did not demand surrender. They opened fire on the outer defense platforms, vaporizing them in flashes of silent light. Panic, cold and efficient, seized the Imperial Palace. Sirens wailed. Holoscreens flickered to life in every hall, showing the advancing wall of enemy ships. The royal court, so proud and cunning just hours before, erupted into chaos. Advisors shouted over each other. Military commanders barked orders into comms, their faces pale. Lady Cerise was visibly trembling. Lord Vaylor tried to project calm, but his hands were clenched into fists. The orbital shield will hold them for an hour, maybe less. A tactical officer yelled from the main display. Our nearest fleet is 2 systems away. They planned this perfectly. The Empress strode into the war room, her face a mask of imperial calm. Inside, her mind was racing. This was not a random raid. The Krill had chosen this moment, knowing the court was divided, knowing her attention was split. It was a dagger aimed at the heart of her reign. Activate the planetary defense grid. She commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. Pull every patrol ship into a defensive sphere. Evacuate the outer colonies. And get me a channel to the Krill War Master. Now. But as she spoke, her eyes found her husband. He stood near the great window. Away from the frantic officers and glowing maps, he was watching the distant flashes of light in the sky, the death of her defenses, with the same calm he had shown in the garden. As if he were watching a storm approach, knowing it could not touch him. A hot spike of anger cut through her fear. "Do you have nothing to say?" she asked him, the words sharper than she intended. The room went quiet. Every head turned. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second she saw not her husband, but the ancient being from the prophecy. Then it was gone. "The shield will fail in 47 minutes, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Their flagship is generating the rift. Destroy it, and the others will be stranded." General Krill, who had just entered the room, pale but steady, shook his head. "We have nothing that can reach it. Their point defense systems will shred our bombers before they get close." A desperate silence fell. The human turned fully from the window. "You don't need bombers," Lord Vaylor scoffed, fear turning to scorn. "What do you propose we ask them nicely to leave?" The human ignored him. His eyes were only on the Empress. "Do you trust me?" asked. It was the same question. From the garden, but the stakes were now the survival of her empire. The room held its breath. Trust the stranger. The man who might be a king from a dead age. Or trust the crumbling might of her own navy. She saw the fear in her court's eyes. She saw the certain defeat on her tactical screens. She saw him standing still in the center of the storm. There was no logical reason to say yes. But the priests. Words echoed, *, he will come quietly. and the proud will laugh at him before they learn the truth. Asterisk, yes, the Empress said, the word leaving her lips before she could doubt it. I trust you. He gave a single, slow nod. The silence in the war room was not peaceful. It was the silence of a tomb, of a breath held too long, of a universe waiting for the next command. The screens still showed the impossible sight, the dark, skeletal shapes of the ancient structures, hanging motionless in the void, their work done. The dust of the Krill flagship drifted like cosmic ash. The enemy fleet was dark, dead, conquered not by empire, but by a single word from a man in a simple shirt. No one congratulated the Empress. No one cheered the victory. The military commanders stood frozen at their stations, their hands still hovering over controls that had been rendered useless. Lord Vaylor's face was the color of cold stone. Lady Cerise had sunk into a chair, her jeweled claws gripping the armrests as if the floor might vanish. The Empress felt the weight of their terror. It was a physical thing, thick and cold in the air. She looked at her husband. Attia returned to the window, his back to the room, watching the silent guardians he had summoned now begin to fade back into the deeper dark. He looked tired, not physically, but in a way that spanned eons. What? General Kale finally whispered, the word cracking in the dry air, are those? No one answered. The human did not turn. Relics, he said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner. Of the still room, leftovers from a war your oldest myths have forgotten. They sleep. They only wake for one thing. For you, the Empress said, not a question. He was silent for a long moment. Then, a slight nod. That single movement broke the last pretense of normalcy. The court had seen power beyond fleets, beyond empires. They had seen a man command. History itself. The fear curdling in the room was now tinged with something worse. Its desperate, crawling need to understand what they were supposed to do. Bow run. Pretend it never happened. Before anyone could move, a new sound began. It started low, a vibration deep in the bones of the palace itself. Then it rose, resonant harmonic ringing that came not from one place, but from everywhere. It was the sound of every temple bell in the capital, every sacred chime across the continent, ringing in perfect, uncommanded unison. The nobles flinched. The priests in the room fell to their knees, their faces etched with holy dread. Awakening. One of them moaned. The light in the chamber changed. The harsh white glow of the tactical screens dimmed. A new, gentle, gold-dan-silver light began to emanate from the very air, coalescing in the center of the war room. The scent of ozone and old stone, of deep space and temple incense, filled the space. And then they appeared dot figures of light and shadow, formless yet profoundly real. 3 of them. They did not walk in. They simply were. Their presence pressed down on the mind, not with weight, but with age. They were concepts given shape, time, memory, and silence. Every soul in the room recognized them instantly. These were not the gods of storybooks. Fast. These were the first ones, the celestial wills depicted in the oldest frescoes in the Temple of Echoes. Beings worshipped for 100,000 years. The source of the Empire's deepest prayers. A collective. Gasp was followed by the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Nobles, generals, advisors, all of them dropped to their knees. Foreheads pressed to the cold metal in absolute, instinctive worship. Even the Empress felt her legs weaken, a lifetime of reverence pulling her down. But she fought it. She was their Empress. She remained standing, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The 3 luminous beings ignored the prostrate court. They ignored the throne. Their focus, their entire presence was bent toward one person, the human at the window. He finally turned a slow, weary pivot. He looked at the divine beings not with awe, but with a kind of ancient recognition, like a king looking upon old, familiar servants. The central being, the one that felt like memory, stepped forward. It did not speak with a voice. Words formed directly in the mind of every person present, clear and terrible and beautiful. Asterisk, asterisk, we have searched the ages. The sound was stars dying and being born. We have followed the echo of your silence. Asterisk, asterisk, the human said nothing. He just waited. The being that was silence glided forward, and then, in a movement that shattered the reality of everyone watching, it did the impossible. It bowed, not a slight nod. A deep, profound inclination of its luminous form, a gesture of ultimate submission. The other two followed. Three gods, the foundational deities of her civilization, were kneeling on the floor of her war room, and they were kneeling to her husband. The mind of the Empress went blank. The last of her doubts, her theories, her fears, they evaporated. Here was the truth, written in light and worship. The prophecy was not a story. It was a biography. The being of memory spoke again, its mental voice now soft, filled with a relief that spanned galaxies. Asterisk, asterisk, we have found you at last, our king. Asterisk, asterisk, the words hung in the sacred air. The human finally moved. He took a single step toward the kneeling gods. He did not look like a conqueror in that moment. He looked like a man coming home after a journey too long. He reached out a hand, not to command, but almost to comfort. You should not have come, he said, and his voice was thick with a sorrow no human should have known. They will have felt you. They will know where I am. The being of time looked up, its form flickering. Let them come, it intoned, its voice the grinding of tectonic plates. Asterisk, asterisk, the galaxy has forgotten your law. It is time to remind them. Asterisk, asterisk, in that moment, the Empress understood the final, terrifying layer. This was not just about a hidden king. This was about an enemy that could make gods afraid. An enemy that had been waiting, hunting for him. And by standing beside him, her empire was now in the crosshairs of a war that had begun before her sun had ignited. The gods rose, their light beginning to fade. But before they vanished entirely, all three turned their luminous gaze upon her. The standing Empress, the voice of memory, filled her mind one last time. A private whisper meant only for her. Asterisk, asterisk, you chose the king. When you saw only the man, remember that? IT will be your strength. When the shadows fall, asterisk, asterisk, then they were gone. The temple bells fell silent. The ordinary lights of the war room buzzed back on. On the floor, the court remained on their knees, trembling. They were not looking at the gods anymore. They were all staring with a mixture of primal terror and dawning, desperate hope. At the silent king and his empress, the silence after the gods left was different. It was not the quiet of shock, but the heavy, breathless quiet of a world that has just been unmade and remade in front of you. The court remained on their knees. No one dared to rise. They were no longer looking at gods. They were looking at the source of the gods' reverence. The human, the king, stood in the center of the room, and the air around him seemed to vibrate with the echo of ancient power. The Empress was the first to move. She did not go to her husband. She walked slowly to the great window, her back to the room, and looked out at her capital, her empire, her stars. They were the same stars as an hour ago, but they were not. Nothing was. Leave us, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade. No one argued. No one even spoke. Lord Valor, Lady Cerise, General Kale, they rose unsteadily and filed out, their eyes wide, their proud heads bowed. They looked like children who had stumbled into a sacred tomb. The great doors of the war room sealed shut with a soft, final hiss. For a long time, the only sound was the low hum of the palace systems returning to normal. "You asked me once," the Empress said, still staring at the stars. "If I trusted you." "I did," he replied from behind her. "I said yes, but I did not know what I was trusting." She finally turned to face him. The mask of the imperial ruler was gone. In its place was the face of a woman who had just seen the foundations of her reality crack. "Who are you?" He did not answer with a title or a grand proclamation. He walked to a simple bench by the window and sat, the weariness she had glimpsed earlier now plain on his frame. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, like a man carrying a universe on his shoulders. "I am old," he began, his voice a low rumble. "Older than your empire. Older than your gods. I was born in the light of the first sun, the one your priest spoke of. My people, we were not like you. We did not build empires of metal and law. We built with thought, with song. We shaped reality the way you shape clay." He looked at his hands, ordinary human hands. There was a war. Not a war for territory or resources, a war for the nature of existence itself. Some of my kind believed in control, in order, in being architects of all things. Others believed in silence, in letting life grow wild and strange. I fought for the middle path, for balance. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but there was no joy in it. I lost. The Empress slowly moved closer, sitting on the bench. Opposite him, "The gods called you king." "A title from the aftertime," he said. "When the war was over, the victors left. They moved beyond this plane of existence. Those who remained the beings you call gods were the ones who could not follow, the wounded, the lost. They found me waiting in the ruins. They had no one else to lead them, so they called me king. And I led them into the long, quiet sleep of healing, hiding from the echoes of the war." "But you left them," she whispered. "I had to," he said, and his eyes met hers. In them, she saw a loneliness so vast it made her heart ache. "King is a target, a symbol. As long as I sat on a throne of starlight, the enemy would hunt. They would never stop, so I vanished. I folded my power deep inside, buried my memory." The final silence was not in the war room, or the temple, or the palace. It was in the space between heartbeats, in the quiet before the storm breaks. The Empress did not call her court. She did not make speeches or rally her fleets. The enemy? Coming was beyond fleets. Instead, she stood with her husband on the highest spire of the palace, a place of wind and whispering stone, and watched the edge of the star system. They stood side by side, not as ruler and consort, but as two pillars holding up the same sky. Below them, the empire held its breath. News in whispers and shivers had spread. The human was not human. The gods had knelt. Something older than darkness was coming. There was no panic in the street, only a deep, dreadful quiet, as if the world itself was waiting. He spoke first, his voice almost lost in the wind. "They are here." She did not see anything at first. Then, at the farthest reach where the black of space met the glow of the nebula, the stars began to wink out, not one by one, but in a slow, spreading wave, as if a vast, invisible ink was bleeding across the cosmos. It was not a fleet. It was an unmaking, a zone of perfect, silent nothingness, advancing toward them. The silent king closed his eyes. When he opened them, the gentle man was gone. In his place was the ancient being, his form seeming to grow, not in size, but in presence. The air crackled. The stones of the spire hummed beneath their feet. "You do not have to watch," he said, not looking at her. "I am not here to watch," the Empress replied. lifting her chin. "I am here to stand." He gave a single, slow nod. Then he raised a hand palm facing the void. From the deep places of the system, the ancient relics awoke again. But this time, they did not move. They sang. A soundless chord of power rippled out from them, a wall of golden light flashing into existence at the border of the advancing nothingness. The two forces met. There was no explosion. It was a contest of silence. The golden light held, but it strained, flickering under the relentless, hungry void. The silent king's outstretched hand trembled. "They are stronger than before," he said, his voice strained. "They have been waiting for this." The wall of light began to crack, spider webs of darkness lacing through it. On the spire, the Empress felt a cold deeper than space touch her skin. This was it. Not a battle of ships, but of wills. And her husband's will, ancient as it was won against a legion of oblivion. She looked at his face, etched with effort, and then she looked down at her own hands. They were just hands. They could not command starlight or weave ancient power. They could only rule and choose and stand. And then she remembered the words of the god of memory. Asterisk, asterisk. You chose the king when you saw only the man. Remember that? It will be your strength. Asterisk, asterisk. Her strength was not power. It was choice. She stepped forward, not in front of him, but to his side. She placed her hand over his trembling one on the parapet. His skin was cold, humming with energy. He glanced at her, confusion in his ancient eyes. "You cannot help with this. A tower would burn you." "I am not trying to help your power," she said, her voice clear and steady over the howling wind of the cosmic clash. "I am reminding you of your choice." She turned her gaze from the dying light to him. "You chose to be a man. You chose to be my husband. You chose this life, this chaos, this feeling. That is what they want to erase. Do not fight them as a king fighting a war. Fight as a man protecting his home." For a moment, nothing changed. The wall of light shattered another degree, the void creeping closer. Then something shifted in his eyes. The strain did not leave his face, but its nature changed. It was no longer the effort of holding back an ocean. It was the focus of a man, defending a single precious thing. He turned his hand under hers, lacing his fingers with hers. A simple, human gesture. He looked back at the void, and he did not shout. He spoke a single word, not in the language of gods or kings, but in the common tongue of her empire. The language they had spoken in their quiet moments together. Enough. The word did not ring across the stars. It settled into them. The failing wall of golden light did not explode with new power. It simply changed. The pure, hard light softened, weaving with threads of silver and blue the colors of her imperial banner, the color of the sky over her homeworld, the color of the dress she wore the day they met. The void of unmaking met this new, woven light, and recoiled. It could erase pure power, but it could not erase a story. It could not unweave a choice, a memory, a feeling. The advancing darkness halted. Then it began to recede, the stars winking back into existence one by one, as if a great shadow was passing. On the spire, the pressure vanished. The wind was just wind again. The silent king, her husband, sagged, breathing heavily. The immense presence faded, leaving the tired man beneath. He looked at their joined hands, then at her, his eyes full of a wonder that had nothing to do with victory. He began, but words failed him. The Empress looked out at the restored stars, at her intact world. She felt no surge of triumph. She felt peace. "They came for a king," she said softly. "But you were not here. You were a husband, standing with his wife. and that was something their perfect order could not understand. Below, in the city, a sound began to rise. A cheers, not panic. It was the sound of life returning, the distant hum of engines. A child's laugh carried on the wind, the simple, chaotic, beautiful noise of existence continuing. He brought her hand to his lips, a kiss as gentle as his first. "You were right," he whispered. The strength was not in the king, Tia, it was in the choice. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder as they watched the dawn break over a galaxy that was, for now, still wondrously, messily alive. The war of gods was over. The quiet life of a man and his empress had just begun.